Kyle here from All Media Reviews. Here to do the second part of my Rock Hall wish list, the second half of the bottom half of it. First of all, I was just gonna mention one or two things that I've been working on that radio thing, the WAMR. I posted one of the playlists, and I did it. I've already come up with the second one. I'm just kind of like randomly doing it between 65 and 2025, and I have some ideas about how to get around some of the copyright stuff. So. It's going to be limited, but my feelings on YouTube, get to 1,000 videos, and then maybe on pause. But it's going to be a while, be a few years, but to try to finish up a lot of these projects, at least some of them. It's not like I'm going to be leaving it, but the belief is that if this really goes well, it's going to be one of not the, one of my main focuses. And if I'm able to do these podcasts, I even downloaded Audacity. It's kind of weird though, but yeah, the belief is I won't just be making the WAMR historical new release of that time 3 month window playlist podcast radio shows WAMR, um, but to try to actually make it like a WAMR historical podcast inspired by John Pratt from Ouija Way Back Wonders and obviously Casey Kasem and American Top 40 and that kind of thing, but in my own sort of vision of it, how it could be from music I love that I know historically and around those times of those releases. So yeah, and I have the Dream Theater versus Fates Warning thing. I may even want to shout out again the Prog Corner with that. I'm gonna do that. I made the list. I did the rankings and the tail of tapes. I need to do that. At least one version of it. I was thinking about doing like I know Heavy Debriefings did on their podcast Desert Island albums. Don't call it Desert Island albums. Call it like albums you'll save in a fire or albums you'd save if your hard drive's about to crash. You have to get rid of it. Songs. I was thinking I could do a songs list um, of Desert Island songs, and just to get off of the whole length thing, to do like 20 to 25, 6 minutes or less, 20 to 25, 6 to 15 minutes, and 20 to 25, 15 minutes plus, and it includes suites. So that's another project in the works that may end up going in the blog, may go on some of the like on the Dream Theater forums at some point. So, but I'll get to the Rock Hall like rant mode again for the second part of it. And a few names still missing in here, but okay. So number 36, I have Paula Abdul. I talked about her, talking about like Cyndi Lauper and stuff. She had one really huge album, like one or two after that, and she is super famous, mostly because of American Idol, the earliest American Idol when it started in the early 2000s. But Forever Your Girl was a massive album. It had like four or five just top 10 hits, maybe number one, number twos. The videos were still prominent on MTV and like Friday Night Videos. So I think if she gets on the ballot, she could get in, or maybe it'll take a second time. But putting Cyndi Lauper and putting not Mariah Carey doesn't deserve to get in more. She came a little bit before Mariah though. But anyway, Paula Abdul, 36. Number 37, Sade. She did get nominated once. Again, she started in the 80s, so again, she's a crossover artist. She's not completely soul and R&B. She has that sophistopop element. So she has enough song like Smooth Operator and forget the other one that were massive, and she's kind of endured and done her own thing. She's very distinct. I always think of like Grace Jones, but I don't know. I think if she doesn't get on the ballot in the next 5 years, she may end up just getting in through a category, just musical excellence. Because everyone likes her. Most people at least know of her music, some of her music. Um, but she received the one nomination a couple of years ago. But again, the voting process, if they had more nominations and more inductees, she'd probably be a shoo-in if she got nominated again. But we need to increase the nominations. So along slightly similar lines, at least in R&B, Barry White. I mean, I would probably put Luther Vandross in before him. I'm not sure if Isaac Hayes is in either, but he was like Sade. He had a very distinct voice and style, imitated a little bit like Michael McDonald. Michael McDonald's not in either, but of course he's done a lot of orchestral. Like he had orchestral compositions with his R&B and sort of, I wouldn't call it pop music, but it was like sort of orchestral pop with an R&B slow jam kind of approach that was very distinct. I mean, part of it is you got to get some of these artists from the '60s finally in. Then you're talking about '70s artists. Too many modern artists are taking up those spots again. But yeah, I mean, he's the love-making artist, Barry White, the deep voice. I love, love themes specifically, which again, there's no vocals on it, but it was on his record. The thing they used at an ABC in the late '70s, early '80s on their ABC week tournament golf. But it's a perfectly uplifting, highly well composed piece. But yeah, Barry White deserves to get in. So another minority artist that was huge, pretty huge in the '80s, especially the Pointer Sisters. Like Paul Abdul, they had 4 or 5 massive hits. Automatic, even on Blackish, they talked about that, how Automatic was a better song than Eleanor Rigby. Um, yeah, that's one of the most uplifting, and I'm so excited. Jump for My Love. They had the '80s. They were really big. They were one of, not the biggest, black all female group of the '80s. And I think they've been mentioned, but there's not enough momentum. I think the Pointer Sisters. I don't know if they would get in from a vote standpoint, but I think the voting base of the hall. I'm talking about the fan vote. The voting base from the hall would be voting for them because, again, people love them. So number 39, number 40, Steve Winwood. I think he's in with Traffic, not in with Blind Faith. But Blind Faith only had the one album, and they had the fantastic jams, of course, on the deluxe edition. But he's in. He's not in, but he had several pop hits in the '80s. One that I always think the line is Rig D's and Higher Love, give me a higher love. He had so many like sort of throwback, almost Motown inspired pop hits in the '80s. Like I'd put Phil Collins ahead of him, but it's very legitimately, a travesty he's not in. Given he had several hits that were kind of adult contemporary and light FM at points. Some of them were blues based, but yeah, Steve. I think he might also be in with band he had before he was in Blind Faith, and I'm in Traffic. Like, thought he was in another band. Apologies for not remembering, but yeah, Steve Winwood as a solo artist should be in. I'm surprised he's not in when I found out. So, and he's obviously not young. Number 40, number 41, Dick Dale. He basically invented surf guitar. And I want to say he got nominated once. But why are you putting in Link Ray and not him? I don't know. Some of these other artists. He would obviously be like an early influence. And I think he passed away a couple of years ago, so he wouldn't be able to accept it as someone from his estate. His family would do it. But, I mean, beyond like Pepe Deluxe, although they claimed that they actually were influenced by some other surf rock besides him. But, yeah, Dick Dale is just egregious. Another, you putting in, what's the name from the Wrecking Crew? He's from that same era, or a little before actually. And again, surf rock, surf guitar, like Wipeout. Think about it. Dick Dale really should be in. Number 42, Kenny Rogers. Now you're putting in Dolly Parton and Willie Nelson. How many other country artists are going to get in? Obvious, massive crossover hits in the late '70s and early '80s. I know there's controversy about him. He had some, sexual harassment, that kind of stuff, accusations, and there was things about him that were kind of toward the later part of his life. I don't know, it was the later part. I don't know when it came out exactly, but which might have blackballed him a little bit. But I just feel like it's a little bit of a travesty. You're putting in the likes of course, Johnny Cash, all these country artists, and you're not putting him, who's maybe the biggest crossover country artist of the last 50 years. And I don't know. He probably wouldn't be. Although if he got nominated, he probably would get in because people know so many of his songs. So anyway, The Gambler, of course. Number 42. Number 43, Fairport Convention. I don't know if there are many, if any, of the quote unquote English folk revival or English folk of the '60s and '70s in the Rock Hall. I mean, yeah, you're Joni Mitchell. Some of these folk artists of that era are in there. Joni Mitchell. You had, but the English folk specifically, not too many. I mean, of course, it was all the Beatles and the British invasion, but they weren't folk groups. These people would have been contemporaries of Dylan, but Dylan, of course, wasn't British. Paul Simon, that whole community. Why are in Fairport Convention? Were probably the biggest of that English folk. You could say that Jethro Tull almost started off that. Well, them and Fleetwood Mac both were kind of blues rock, but they were both British at that point. But Fairport Convention should be in. Legion Leaf was a kind of a landmark record in that style. Um, but it's R.I.P. Sandy Denny. Of course, people know her, and I only first heard about her through the being on Battle of Evermore from Led Zeppelin. But Richard Thompson, I don't think he's ever been nominated either. Richard and Linda, but Fairport Convention, it's pretty egregious. Where's the English folk scene? They're the obvious name. You could maybe get Pentangle in there at some point too. And of course, Renaissance, which really weren't folk. I mean, Moody Blues, Renaissance were more obviously prog and like orchestral pop, but they had their folk elements too. Renaissance might have a shot at Fairport ever got in. So number 43. Number 44, Lenny Kravitz. Of course, he got nominated, was it last year in 20, would have been for 24. I think it was 24, 23. Anyway, I think he will get in. And, I don't know if I'd be putting him in ahead of people like Sade, but, I mean, he's rock. And of course, the influence from like your likes of James Brown and Jimi Hendrix and then Prince, he's the next kind of line of that, the soulful, blues rock and I mean he had several hits. His early records especially were big. I mean of course he had family that was in the entertainment industry, but yeah, I hope he gets it. I hope he doesn't get it. I hope someone like Bruno Mars in 10 years gets in and he's still waiting to get in because he's the one I felt like should have done the tribute to Prince at the Grammys, but he didn't do it. He did a later tribute. They did it with Bruno Mars, but Lenny Kravitz should get in. I don't know when. Hopefully, it'll be sooner than later. Again, like people like Sting would get nominated once, and then you don't hear from them for many years. But I think there's enough. The fact I think he showed up at one of the ceremonies a couple of years ago helps his cause. So it was last year before. Anyway, Lenny Kravitz, 44. Number 45, Nick Drake. Again, I was talking about English folk. Now he was a singer, songwriter, folk artist. Wasn't a band, but I guess you could say technically he would be English folk. He's become more and more influential the last 20, 25 years. I mean, Elliott Smith, of course, RIP to him, but he had a relatively short career. I mean, he has a longer discography than Jeff Buckley, but yeah, I mean, Syd Barrett, I don't think is in as a solo artist, but he's of a similar generation. Syd Barrett, after he left Floyd, did a couple solo records, not the same style exactly, but I had some similar elements because Nick Drake was not just folk; he was psychedelic and atmospheric folk at points. But I'd really love to see him get in. He is kind of a cult figure, I guess if you're gonna put like John Prine or people like that need to get in too. But I don't know why people don't consider him. I mean, people that love Record Store Day always talk about Nick Drake. The hipsters love him, so I think he would get put in as a musical excellence or maybe even early influence. But he needs to get in, though. It's surprising he's not getting in. It's number 45. Number 46, Rainbow. Dio is more important because he has a larger body of work that to ride on. But Rainbow had 2 or 3 massive records. Those first couple records were really big. And I don't know. I mean, the thing is, if you put in Joy Division or one of these bands that had a fragmented history, a limited but big history, they weren't as big as Sex Pistols. Sex Pistols had limited history. MC5 had limited history. Why isn't Rainbow considered? Richie Blackmore is in with Deep Purple at least, but you could put just Richie Blackmore in as a solo act and include his solo stuff and some of his other Blackmore's Night, of course, his Rainbow stuff. But Rainbow was big enough. I don't know how big they could. They toured to big enough venues, but they were big enough for a window of time that they would warrant, the ability to be in the Rock Hall. How many bands have covered Stargazer and a few of the other bigger songs besides Dream, not just Dream Theater. Anyway, number 48, Procol Harum got nominated like the year before Rush got in, I think, or maybe the same year. Haven't seen nominations since. The Zombies are finally in. If they got in like 5 or 6 years ago, those British invasion bands from the 60s, and they've spanned into the 70s, of course. They have a pretty respected catalog. People just know them for Whiter Shade of Pale, but they have several other records and tracks that the fans love. Of course, Transatlantic covered not a Salty Dog, but Hell 'Twas an I, and yeah, I mean, in some ways, they almost deserve to get in ahead of some of the prog bands. Maybe not Crimson, because Crimson came along right around the same time, which, by the way, hope Robert Fripp's okay. He suffered a heart attack a few weeks ago, but he's doing better, I guess. But anyway, I don't know if they should be putting in like your Kansases or even Supertramps or something like that. Maybe necessarily in front of them, but those even though those bands maybe had slightly more reach commercially, but because they predate them, obviously it's like the whole thing with the why the Monkeys not in some of these bands that they influence are getting in, like Kiss. Um, but yeah, Procol Harum, egregious. They got nominated once. They should just be put in maybe under early influence or excellence again. Number 48, number 49. Well, they got. I'll just kind of go bypass them. I had Salt and Pepper, and they just got put in for excellence. So I'm gonna substitute out one other name at the very end that I forgot. So number 50, Grand Funk Railroad. They're kind of like the Guess Who, or it's hard to believe they're not in, or Blue Oyster Cult. Everyone loves them. A lot of people know several of their songs. Why, they crossed over. The Doobie Brothers are in. There's certain artists that like basically they were contemporaries of that have gotten in. The Guess Who I think need to get in too, probably even more so. But Prince was a fan. There's a lot of people they crossed over. So I don't know why they haven't been considered. I think it's mainly because they've what's that other band? Little Feat, and Little River Band. I kind of think of them with they're mostly a '70s band, but you're talking about bands from the '70s that are not in. They're in the top, at least the top 20, if not the top 10. But they got passed over for some of the more commercially big AR bands like Foreigner and Bad Company this year. So I don't know. So speaking of '70s bands that probably are even bigger, slightly bigger than Grand Funk Railroad, America. While again, I saw them last year. I can't speak to knowing their catalog beginning to end. They had 7 or 8 massive songs, including Horse with No Name and Ventura Highway. You know, uh, Again, they get it on the ballot. They should get in. I don't know. People think of the dad rock. I love some of the just the moments they have, the dreamy moments they have. I think Toto needs to get in before them. Though they're stylistically, Toto is not exactly like them. That whole yacht rock kind of family tree, even though America's they're not from America, they're from England, ironically, but based on their name. But yeah, America definitely needs to get in. It's pretty egregious they're not in as well. Number 51 or 50. Number 52, Weird Al Yankovic. He's been around since the early 80s. Super, super famous. While his style's a little different, you have Zapp and you have some comedic acts in there. He was very original, his original approach. Again, it's parody music, so some people won't vote for that, unfortunately. But I think if he got on the ballot, there'd be enough people of the voting ship that would want to vote for him, though, because everyone loves him, and how many parodies he's done. It would be a massive deal if he got in. I think if he got in, he actually probably would win the vote. Now thinking about it, he probably would win the fan vote too, because again, everyone loves Weird Al Yankovic. Number 52 just had the movie, of course, the sort of parody mockumentary satire with Daniel Radcliffe. Number 53. Well, among the 90s acts that aren't in, they're among the top, if not the top. They're among the top 5. Weezer. And I think if Weezer got in, it would be to the Monkees' benefit and some other artists. Obviously, Buddy Holly, and I'm not much of a Weezer fan, although they influence a lot of bands I like. Fountains of Wayne may have a shot, actually, if Weezer get in. But yeah, and I think it's only a matter of time. It's just they're trying to obviously take some other '90s acts ahead of them, like Missy Elliott, like what's it called? A band that got the duo they just got in this year. Not the Black Eyed Peas. Big Boi and Andre 3000. But I just think that Weezer liked Smashing Pumpkins, but there's not really much controversial about Weezer that I'm aware of, other than the fact they, kept on naming their self-title with different colors. I think it's a matter of they got on the ballot, it would be 1 or 2 times and they would get in. So, see here. That's number 53. Number 54, Harry Nilsson. Pretty egregious. I mean, again, you're putting in people like Jimmy Buffett. It's like this guy was a savant songwriter. He wrote songs. I want to say he did for the Monkey. Had a strong relationship with Mickey Dolenz, and the Beatles. Like people thought he was considered like the 5th Beatle in some ways, like the post Beatles. Yeah, his reach was wide, even though he had but he was more of a. I guess he could be considered under a category, maybe. Probably would. But again, if you're putting in Warren Zevon, Harry Nilsson needs to be in too. But yeah, 54. Number 55, Joe Satriani. Um, Kind of the biggest name among the sort of guitar based, sort of blues rock, heavy blues rock, guitar based, Jimi Hendrix influence kind of thing. The G3. He had the Surfer, something, not the Silver Surfer, whatever, the album from the 80s where he had somewhat of a crossover instrumental hit. Um, and he's an industry savant and icon in some ways. You got to start putting, like, Ingwe Malmsteen could be in, Steve Vai, obviously. I mentioned Pat Metheny. I would rather see Pat Metheny get in, but Joe Satriani is more rock, actually. So I would actually see him probably getting in ahead of Pat Metheny, but or even John McLaughlin. But yeah, just a matter of you need people, and he would probably put under a category rather than getting voted in because there's two people that don't know him that would be voting. Like, it's not pop music. But anyway, Satriani. Number 56, Pantera. Well, I think Megadeth should be in before them because they predate them, and they're probably overall just a little bit bigger. They had their own tour, the Gigant Tour, of course. I forgot to mention. They were basically the founders of groove metal, even though the first pair of records were power metal, ironically. Um, and of course, you had the whole controversy with Dimebag and some of the other members, but they've influenced countless metal bands, especially including Dream Theater. Even though Pantera wasn't prog metal, but Dream Theater and King's X, especially though King's X wasn't metal, but any groove metal riff basically owes Pantera, and groove metal's become a pretty big, or groove metal with a groove, the groove guitar riff. Um, Cowboys from Hell was, I know that thing went multi-platinum. In the metal scene, it's sort of a staple. So yes, Pantera needs to get in if they're going to put more metal in eventually. They're in the top 5 metal bands that need to get in that are not in right now. For 57, Beck. He got nominated about 4 or 5 years ago when he first became eligible and didn't get in. I think, like Weezer, if he gets on the ballot 1 or 2 more times, he'll get in. I would say the same thing about Mariah Carey, though. But multi-genre kind of. He's done hip hop, he's done folk music, done experimental pop, indie, of course. Yeah, he'll get in. I could take or leave. I mean, I don't think the likes of Self and some of the other artists that he are contemporaries or he influenced. Obviously, the guys from Apes and Androids, I would say, those people are probably not going to get in, or even like Brian Scary. But it'd be interesting to see their take. Maybe they could even maybe Matt Mahaffey could come in and perform. That would be awesome. Or the guys from Jellyfish, maybe. But anyway, Beck needs to be in, and he probably will eventually get in the next 10 years, maybe in 5 years. So you got to get some of these other artists in. So number 58, Badfinger. Talking about 70s artists like Grand Funk Railroad, the Guess Who. Badfinger had how many pop hits? They had that run of like 5 years. They were huge. R.I.P. Joey Mullen, the last surviving like regular early member, classic lineup member. Alex from Beer and Vinyl, of course, talks about them a lot. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of, I mean, not a matter of time, but if they're going to put more 70s acts in, I'd like to see that are dad rock or not dad rock. They were a pop band more so. I mean, 10cc, I think, deserves to get in too, but Badfinger were even more commercially successful. So, Badfinger number 58. Number 59, Smashing Pumpkins. Well, Weezer, I would prefer to see get in. I think Smashing Pumpkins, if they get on the ballot, will get in soon. No, kitty. Get your mouth on something you shouldn't. But, they will get in, I think. It's just a matter of whether Billy Corgan, the issue with Billy Corgan, people, the voters, and the nomination committee. But I would be surprised if 10 years from now we haven't seen Smashing Pumpkins get in. But now that you got Soundgarden, how many more of the grunge bands? The only one really, the big one, is Alice in Chains. Otherwise, you'll have to talk about Stone Temple Pilots, like Korn and Limp Bizkit. I think Smashing Pumpkins should get in definitely before Korn, and probably before Limp Bizkit, because Limp Bizkit were like, a punchline. And they probably should get in. They were bigger than even Stone Temple Pilots, so I don't know. Anyway, Smashing Pumpkins number 59. Number 60, Three Dog Night. Well, they didn't write a lot of their songs, I guess, but they were huge. They had, I don't know how many number one songs. Joy to the World, of course. I always get mixed up between Jeremiah was a Bullfrog, but yeah, Three Dog Night. I was really surprised to learn that they're them and like Humble Pie, Moby Grape. Who's the other one from that era? That the British band that they talk about why the Monkeys are like the Cowsills. Three Dog Night were bigger than almost all those bands actually. And so it's just the criticism is they like the Monkees. Well, they didn't write their own music. It shouldn't really matter. I don't know if they had the Wrecking Crew playing any of their records. That wouldn't surprise me. But so did the Beach Boys, and I like the Beach Boys. I'm a Beach Boys fan. So, but anyway, Three Dog Night number 60. Number 61, I do have 10cc. But I've fallen in love with a lot of the records. I'm still getting to know them. Yeah, I mean they had, of course, I'm Not in Love, which was pretty big, and it's found like a cult following, like sort of it's basically yacht rock again. They were British, but yacht rock isn't necessarily exclusively American, even though some people think it should be. But um, they were progressive pop, and they were basically progenitors of what I call Empire, the early period of they were part of that whole, them and XTC and you could say borderline Queen and Sweet and some of those bands, but using pop music in the studio, very, very, very well produced. And they had 3 or 4 big albums. I just didn't know about them until about 15, 16 years ago. My friend John compared House of Fools to them, but I've come to become a pretty big fan, and I'd love to see them get in. I think XTC should probably get in before them. XTC actually they came around a little bit later, but anyway, I'd love to see 10cc again. Badfinger too. I mean, a bunch of those bands from the 70s, it would be great to see them get in, but again, it's just selling tickets, want to be modern, they got to mix it up. We need more nominations and more inductees every year. Number 62, Thin Lizzy. Again, I would say them. Blue Oyster Cult, I think, deserve it a little bit more, but Thin Lizzy, they got nominated. People thought they were going to get in, but they got nominated the same year as like 3 or 4 other hard rock and metal bands, and that's why they didn't get in. I think it was Priest, and I forget who else, maybe Motorhead. But, I think they'll get put in as an under category at some point within the next 10 years. Let's see here, number 63, Patsy Cline. She would be under a category. She had 3 massively influential sort of country pop hits from the late 50s, early 60s. Of course, died tragically. She's a martyr in some ways, but her influence is still very much felt. My wife loves her, so it's a personal bias, but they need to put more of these acts. They're going to put country acts in. Why are you putting in Dolly Parton and not putting her in? That doesn't make any sense to me. So, Patsy Cline, number 63. Number 64, Queensryche. My prog metal bias. They had the huge hit in Silent Lucidity, Operation Mindcrime, one of the most influential prog metal albums of the last, 35, 40 years. They played arenas. They got big enough where they're at another level than most prog metal. If there's one prog metal band that ever really gets in, it would be them. It's a matter of, you got to put in Megadeth. You got to put in some of the other metal bands first. Judas Priest, of course, and Metallica, and Iron Maiden's got to go in first. But after that, they're one of the next names. So Queensryche, number 64. Number 65, Muse. I don't think it's a matter of if, just a matter of when. If Radiohead's getting in, they came out not that long, only a few years after Radiohead. And while they sound a little bit like them, they sound way different now. But they're playing at arenas and stadiums in Europe. They've had some pretty big hits. They're pretty massive and they're hugely influential. You're talking about rock bands of the last 25, 30 years. They're one of, if not the biggest band. So I think it's just a matter of time. They'll be in the next 10 years, I think, but I hope it's sooner than later. Billy Ocean, yeah, because you have Radiohead got in on their second chance. You're putting in White Stripes on the second chance. Why is Muse not getting in? Billy Ocean, number 66. Pop acts from the 80s. He had 4, 5, 6, 7 top 10 hits. Again, like Phil Collins, like some of these pop artists from the 80s, Huey Lewis, Kenny Loggins. Billy Ocean had too many hits not to warrant getting in the Rock Hall. Also crossover, like, R&B, obviously. I don't know, Sade could get in. We need more of these acts from the 80s to get in before you're putting so many artists from the 2000s, even the 90s in, and he'd be one of them. 67, Spice Girls. Again, my wife's massive fan. They were massive for like a 5-year period. They're eligible. I'm surprised they've been brought up, but Spice Girls, then Britney and Christina, and eventually you'll have Taylor Swift, unfortunately, and Adele, and Drake. But yeah, I think if they got nominated, it would be like a Mariah thing, where it'd only be a matter of time before they got in. They probably will get in. Maybe not next 10 years, but the next 15 years, probably. Number 67. 68, Michael McDonald. Well, he obviously was with the Doobie Brothers. He got in with the Doobie Brothers. He had a lot of solo hits and collaborations. He really deserves it. Probably under a category, but it's egregious that he wouldn't be in. We need to get him in as a solo act while he's still around. But yeah, because he's the king of yacht rock, the godfather of yacht rock. Now before whatever it was, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, even the 70s, 80s, the yacht rock turned, it was a soft rock. Godfather, soft rock, Godfather, yacht rock. Number 68. Number 69, Coldplay. Well, I'm not a huge fan. They every so once in a while have songs I like, and they have obviously a bunch of massive hits. They played the Super Bowl. They're gonna get in. It's a matter of when, really. And again, I would rather see Muse get in, but Coldplay, you know, they're gonna get in, and I think they well deserved. It'd be interesting to see who inducts them. I bet in the next 10 years they probably will get in. Number 69, number 70, an artist who probably will get in eventually, but the fact that Bjork isn't in yet, you could say Bjork. Back, this is Bjork. Massively influential from a sort of pop, electronic pop, all these electronic artists in the last decade. Oh, a ton of Bjork. I love Imogen Heap. Imogen Heap had one massive hit. Bjork has had like 3 or 4 like diamond albums. She's the queen of like indie pop in some ways, of experimental and indie pop, orchestral pop. So she will get in, I think. It will be interesting if she shows up. Kate Bush got in. Kate Bush had to get in before her. Even she goes back with the Sugar Cubes. Sugar Cubes, her first album came out in like the late 70s when she was like 16. So the last one I didn't include on this list for now is Rick James. That's another egregious one. He was like very influential in the R&B, a songwriter, collaborator. He discovered, was it Tina Marie? Of course, the parody video with Charlie Murphy and stuff like that. But and basically, what if MC Hammer ever gets in, he has to go in before that, because basically MC Hammer's biggest hit, "Don't Touch This," basically borrowed if not ripped off Rick James, Super Freak. So Rick James, even though he had some controversy, he's not around anymore, and he probably did too much. I think the likes of Sade and Luther Vandross and Billy Ocean should probably get in first, but that's kind of splitting hairs. It's pretty egregious that he was a contemporary of Prince. He after Prince, he might have been the biggest sort of R&B songwriter of the 70s and 80s. So yeah, Rick James needs to get in at some point. He'll probably get put in under a category, but anyway. So that's the list. Maybe I'll eventually do another list of stuff that, like, artists that I would like to see get in, but probably have very little shot that, I could see in a better world will get in. But that's the 70 sort of, biggest snubs from the other 35 I did in the previous video. Snubs, wish lists from the rock hall standpoint. Some of these, obviously, Salt and Peppa got in. Some of these will eventually get in. But, it'd be nice. I would be happy if a third of these artists get in. We'll see. Let's see in 5 years or 10 years from now. I'll look at this list and see how many of these have actually gotten in. We'll see. The Monkees are still the number one name, and until the day I die, I'll be wanting them to get in. So anyway, thank you for watching, though, and we'll see you next time.